Hi, I'm Jay Nordlinger with the Human Parade. We're broadcasting from New York City, where our guest, Ignat Solzhenitsyn, lives. He was born in Moscow. He did much of his growing up in Vermont, and he's lived in London, Philadelphia, and elsewhere. He's a musician, both a pianist and a conductor. He gives piano recitals and makes concerto appearances all over the world. He's the principal guest conductor of the Moscow Symphony Orchestra. For 6 years, he was music director of the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. He's now the conductor laureate. You seem a little young to be a laureate, but you are, aren't you?
I guess so.
Ignat lives not far from this studio with his wife, Carolyn, a psychiatrist, and their 3 perfect children. I can say that because I know them. Our guest is the middle of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's 3 sons. Who was Solzhenitsyn? A lot of people, when this was being discussed toward the end of 1999, said that he was the man of the century. Churchill, Solzhenitsyn, such names were at the front of the pack. Solzhenitsyn, a Russian writer, was probably the principal witness against Soviet communism. His 3-volume investigation, The Gulag Archipelago, broke the back of the Soviet Union worldwide. From then on, it had practically no pretense to legitimacy. Solzhenitsyn suffered greatly and persevered in order to bring the truth about this dark place, his country, to the world. Malcolm Muggeridge, the British journalist, called him the noblest human being alive. Ignat Solzhenitsyn is not just a son of his father, he's an expert on his father. He knows Solzhenitsyn's life backward and forward. He's also a sometime translator of his writings. So, we're going to have 2 subjects today, music and Alexander Solzhenitsyn, though in the opposite order mainly. Our guest is equipped, and more than equipped, to talk about both. Nice to see you, Ignat.
And you, Jay.
I was thinking we won't pretend we don't know each other well. We'll just have the kind of conversation we often have. Talk about some things we've talked about before and maybe some new things. I thought we'd start with this name of yours, this mouthful of a name, and a great name. I'm sure it's a name to be proud of. But is it also now and then a burden? Do you feel the need to be great, to be brave, to be compassionate? And is it a name to? Is it occasionally a burden to bear, or simply a joy?
It is both, and it is all those things that you mentioned, and many, many more. To bear this name is an honor. It's a privilege. And it's a big responsibility. And it's a source of great expectations from millions of people who know my father's writings, who know the principles that he defended, and who expect something outstanding, something miraculous even from his progeny.
Yeah, that's a lot. And he and your mother have 3 sons. You're in the middle, and you have 2 brothers. What do your brothers do?
My brothers are partners with McKinsey and Company, the big consulting firm in Moscow. And so they've been able to return and live full-time there in Moscow. They're both married to Russian girls, and so the center of gravity of the family has shifted back, as we always hoped and suspected it would, back to Moscow.
And I think you told me once that here in the United States, people ask you almost every day when you give your name at a hotel or wherever, any relation? And you say yes. And I think you told me that that doesn't happen in Russia because the name is almost unique, or maybe unique.
It happened just for the first time a week ago in Russia.
Huh.
And I had that very same Russian version of any relation. And that really took me aback, because in Russia people either don't say anything, as they also might not hear, or they immediately understand, of course, it's a silly question, because of course it's a relation, not to mention that if it's someone looking at my passport or official document, then my patronymic really gives it away. As many viewers will know, the patronymic is based on the father's name. So Ignat Alexandrovich Solzhenitsyn. So then there's hardly any possibility that I'm the son of another.
In Russia, are you greeted as a kind of holy child? Do people sometimes get a little bit weird and reverential around you?
Yes, they do get weird and reverential.
Yeah.
They do. But not really to me, just to me as the conduit of some force.
Yeah. Are you Russian or American? I always thought of you as just a good old American kid and a sports fanatic and a Yankee fan. And I think I said something when I said, well, of course you're an American. You said, no, I'm a Russian. Are you both? Are you primarily one or the other?
I don't know really how to answer that. I've been asked that question consistently from 6 years old.
Oh, gee. Sorry to give it to you again.
Well, but it seems to me that my answer only gets more muddled as time goes by. I don't know what exactly I am. I know that I was raised as a Russian with a love for Russia and with an orientation, as they say now, toward Russia, culturally and culturally, linguistically, very important. Russian was my first language. Had no English till I went to school at six or seven. So the problems of Russia, particularly in these last troublesome, complex, hopeless at times, 20 years of emergence from communism, from under the rubble, have been very trying for Russia, and I identify with those problems in a way that I do not with such admittedly far lesser problems, in my view, that plague the U.S.
Getting lesser all the time, so to speak.
Perhaps.
But I know what you mean.
Perhaps. The competition is on.
When were you first aware, I think I remember hearing this, when were you first aware that your father was different or special? Did you hear something about him on the radio when you were a kid? Am I remembering correctly?
No.
Maybe that was another brother.
Maybe one of my brothers might have said that, but I don't remember. I don't remember a moment when that happened.
Yeah. But you figured out at some point that he was not just your dad, but a big deal in the world.
Yes. It was, I'm sure, something that became evident through his work and why is he working all the time and why is he writing and what is he writing and why can't we play basketball until 3:30 in the afternoon? Mm-hmm. Because he had very few quirks and very few needs, very few privileges of a genius that he allowed himself to take. But one of the few was he needed silence or something approaching silence for his writing. And so when we dribbled and tried to shoot and usually missed and hit the backboard, that
clanging the rim.
Exactly, yeah. Clanging the rim. We had a rule not before 3:30.
Just a little historical background or historical briefing. Remind me why he was tossed into the Gulag in the first place. Did he write something indiscreet in a letter that was found?
That's right. He was on the front, on what is known in the West as the Eastern Front, was known in Russia as the Western Front, in what is now Belarusia and then East
so-called
Prussia.
White Russia.
White Russia, East Prussia, Königsberg, Kaliningrad. And he was friends, had a friend from university who was fighting in the Romanian front. And they figured out what they thought to be a rather sophisticated coding system by means of which they could avoid and supersede and stump the military censorship. They were well aware that every letter was opened. They, however, underestimated the resources and perhaps the capacity of the Soviet Leviathan. And those silly young girls who they thought weren't capable of much, who were actually opening those letters, and I mean, they knew who they were. They saw their type. They said, "Oh, they'll never figure out that there's anything seditious here." Mm-hmm. But they did, or they passed it to someone who did. And so their whole correspondence was monitored for a number of months, and eventually action was taken to protect the integrity of the Soviet government.
You're watching The Human Parade. Our guest is Ignat Solzhenitsyn. We'll be back in a moment. Let's jump way ahead to 1962. Is that the year of Day in the Life of Ivan, as I say, Denisovich?
Yes.
Published in Novy Mir. What was the impact of that book, that novella, on the country?
It's most frequently described by many different sources and eyewitnesses, so to speak, people who lived through those weeks as a bomb, a psychological bomb, a cultural bomb, a bomb that, by definition, therefore, blew up so many of the conventions of the time, of Khrushchev's dancing around the past in an awkward and increasingly contradictory jig. Khrushchev himself did not understand what he was unleashing. His hope was that he read Ivan
unleashing
Denisovich.
by permitting the publication of it?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He had read Ivan Denisovich personally, was moved by it, was taken with it, and he felt this is the best thing we could put forward now to counteract this, and the code word, as you'll remember, was the cult of personality, which was the code name for anything to do with Stalin. And he thought this would be a local anesthetic applied to that wound, but instead it was a cathartic event that changed overnight the nature of Soviet society, many say, because when people saw, if this is possible to say, then anything's possible. And even though that took another 27 years to come to fruition, but after Ivan Denisovich, you could no longer say the Soviet Union is a completely closed society.
So what years were the big novels, The First Circle and Cancer Ward?
The First Circle took 10 years to complete, was completed in 68. Cancer Ward was completed a little earlier.
So Solzhenitsyn wins the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1970.
Yes.
He doesn't go to Sweden to pick it up. He could have, correct?
One-way ticket.
One-way ticket. And a lot of people might think, what a blessing that one-way ticket would have been, a chance to get out of the Soviet Union, freer to write, freer to campaign for human rights and democracy. Why didn't he leap at it?
He could not imagine being torn away from his country, from his people, from his environment. He felt it was his duty to stand and fight. And to stand and fight at a comfortable remove of so many miles, but really, more importantly, beyond that famous, infamous Iron Curtain, was inconceivable to him.
So he does pick it up in 1974, 4 years later. He was kicked out. He was exiled. He didn't go willingly then.
He was arrested again. He knew the drill. He knew it was coming. After the publication of the Gulag Archipelago, it was only a matter of which day they would choose to arrest him. 8 KGB officers broke into our apartment in Moscow, and in a very civilized way, it must be said, told him to go, told him to come with them. And he was prepared. He knew. He said farewell to us, those of us little children who were home. Some of us were out being walked in the yard and so forth. Said goodbye to my mother and expected anything could happen. And the most likely scenario, he thought, was another stint in prison camps and labor camps. Although he considered the possibility that he would be executed, he considered the possibility he would be in solitary confinement, and also the possibility that he would be expelled. And indeed, he was processed through the penal system very, very quickly at that time, expeditiously, charged with treason by the Supreme Soviet, the rubber stamp parliament at the time, and put in a plane not knowing where he was going and not even sure what his sentence was because it was done in secret, of course, not in his presence. And so the plane flew for 3 hours and landed in Frankfurt am Main. And he found himself in the West.
That was 1974. And when had you come along?
72.
And when did the rest of the Solzhenitsyns leave, or when were they made to leave?
6 weeks after he was expelled.
Let's talk for a second about the writing of the Gulag Archipelago. Some months ago, I wrote a piece, did some research about the impact of the internet on dissidents and dissident movements around the world. In China, for example, and Iran, and Cuba. And internet and so-called social media are very important to the extent they're available. And I remember you said, my parents and their friends had nothing like that. The Gulag Archipelago, each copy was typed out individually by people working in secrecy and in great danger. Tell me a little more about that. How did the Gulag Archipelago get around?
Well, maybe the Gulag is not the best example because the Gulag was the ultimate bomb against the regime and was kept utterly secret by my father. There were only 2 copies. And he did not allow anyone to read. It was simply too much. It would be too much to expect anyone to bear that burden of even knowing of its existence.
Too hot to handle.
That's right.
Yeah.
But in the case of other less explosive, less total texts, such as the novels that you mentioned, they were typed letter by letter on a typewriter. Obviously, no word processing at that time. Maybe not even in the U.S., but certainly not in Russia, not in the Soviet Union. They were typed very, very close, very, very small, very tight, both sides of the paper, anything to conserve volume and space. And they were passed from hand to hand. This was the samizdat, self-publishing. Self-publishing has a very different
Could go to Amazon.com.
context now,
Yeah,
exactly. But then it was that kind of underground publishing network, and all kinds of code names, and some people were very involved. Some people were unofficial librarians, and risking huge prison sentences to distribute Solzhenitsyn, Pasternak, Akhmatova, Bulgakov, Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was banned.
Even him. Let's jump to Vermont. I remember going there for the first time to see you in your house and sort of approaching the area. And it was getting more remote, deeper into the woods. And I thought, he must really have wanted to get away and to be let alone. Because the house is in such splendid isolation, it seems to me. Did he aim for as remote a spot as he could have?
I wouldn't go that far. But clearly, he made a different choice than a typical writer might choose for himself.
Yeah.
It could have been Manhattan, but it was something very different.
There was a famous sign, I think, at the general store in Cavendish, Vermont, "No directions to Solzhenitsyn home." Does that sign still exist? Is it a souvenir somewhere? Do you know?
Somewhere it exists. I think it's actually at the museum, a little museum in Cavendish.
Huh.
The full sign said something like "No shoes, no service."
No directions to Solzhenitsyn home.
No directions.
Even
to
better.
Exactly. So
Even
it was
better.
in the context of a traditional American general store type of a warning or advisory.
It's a unique sign. You can't get it at a factory.
No.
On the grounds of the home in Cavendish, there is a rock, a boulder, that has a famous place in Solzhenitsyn history. Could you tell us about that?
My father took us sat us down on this boulder. It really is a large, large boulder, big enough for, well,
Three
for
kids.
a father and three kids
Yeah.
to sit astride it. And my father told us it was a magic horse, a kind of Pegasus, that had been cast under a wicked spell. And it was sleeping or dreaming or waiting until Russia was free. And when Russia would cast off her yoke and awaken, this horse would come alive and would fly and take us back to Russia.
Nice.
It's still there.
You told me once about this famous picture of Solzhenitsyn, where it's sometimes captioned, breathing free air. You know, maybe the most famous photograph of him, at least in the United States, and breathing in free air. But it was actually, that look came from exasperation with the media, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
What happened?
A large Life magazine, for those who remember Life, photo spread Kum's story, but I think it was mostly photos, as Life magazine used to do, was being shot. Something that my parents agreed to somewhat reluctantly, maybe very reluctantly. At any rate, they agreed to it, and a horde of photographers and equipment and lenses of various kinds and contraptions we'd never seen descended on our home. And this was a candid moment when, in between shooting for hours, from various angles and with various lenses and with various light setups, my father just kind of, looked up to the heavens and just took a deep breath and
that look was immortalized.
but as you said, it was immortalized as Solzhenitsyn peacefully breathing in the Vermont air.
Yeah, right, fine. You told me once about a funny incident. It must have been December 1979, and the Red Army invades Afghanistan. And you're on the school bus, and the kids taunt you as some kind of commie.
That's right.
You think they eventually learned why you were there in the first place?
I don't know.
Funny incident.
I don't know. It's too much to ask of little children to have a good grasp of geopolitical issues. But
of course.
The rich irony of Solzhenitsyn's sons being labeled communist was too much to even know where to begin.
Yeah.
Countermanding that.
In my experience, Ignat, I've done a lot of work with and among Chinese dissidents and exiles, Cuban dissidents and exiles, others. Prominent dissidents, those in exile communities, they're often factions, and they often disdain one another instead of being united. It's really a shame. I see this as a pattern across many communities. Some of the leading figures hate one another, really. Did your father have good relations or any relations with people like Bukovsky, Sharansky, Sakharov? Were they all a kind of club, or did each man do his own thing individually?
More the latter than the former. Mm-hmm. I think that this regrettable kind of division that you talk about in other dissident movements or maybe expat communities existed also in the Russian community. Dispersed as it was very, very broadly, very widely in the United States, in Paris, in Berlin, West Berlin, Israel, and so forth. The names you mentioned, Bukovsky, Sharansky, these people really had very much also their own specific agendas that they were pursuing that did not necessarily have to do with the broader dissident movement, if you will. Mm-hmm. And my father himself certainly was, although frequently implored to take the helm of resistance, or perhaps frequently accused of taking the helm of resistance, and seeking to control all Russian exiles, had neither the power nor the desire, any desire to do that. Mm. He was a happy but unwilling warrior during his full decade, 12 years, of daily battle with the regime when still at home. So for him, we come back to the theme of exile. Yes, it did end up being a blessing in certain ways, but those ways mostly had to do with his ability to spread his wings, spread his papers, as any writer would want to do, again, maybe in the pre-computer age, mm-hmm. to spread his papers out without fear that they would have to be, that they would be seen, that they would have to be collected in a mad scramble and hidden away again, and just to be able to write in peace. He set himself absurdly ambitious goals in terms of scope of work that he hoped to accomplish in the years in the West, and specifically the Red Wheel. And it's to his extraordinary credit that he was able to achieve exactly what he set out to do.
Was that his principal activity in Cavendish, to write the Red Wheel?
It was.
Yeah. The composer Shostakovich, Dmitri Shostakovich, did he do badly by your dad?
Shostakovich bore the brunt of Soviet viciousness and oppression in a way that few other artists did. All the ones persecuted more than Shostakovich were killed. So, of all those who were not killed, let's put it that way, mm-hmm. Shostakovich experienced perhaps the most agonizing time. As far back, of course, as the mid-1930s, a truly, truly frightening time under Stalin. So, by the time that my father arose as this calf that did battle.
The Oak and the Calf, the title of his literary memoir. Yeah.
Exactly, doing battle with this oak, with this Soviet monster. Shostakovich was an old man, was a tired man, and I think did not have an appetite for fight.
Mm-hmm. The cellist Rostropovich did very well by your father, didn't he?
Well, Rostropovich had that appetite. Rostropovich exhibited tremendous courage and willingness to go as far as necessary.
What did he do? What did he do for your dad?
First of all, he offered him a home when he had nowhere else to go. By the way, we think of that as a loosey-goosey kind of a metaphor. Well, mm-hmm. He had nowhere to go, and so he went to live with his aunt, yeah. or with his friend.
You mean this literally?
Right. In America, there's, in my experience, there is no such thing as nowhere to go. There's always somewhere to go, yeah. Even when people are very hard up. In the Soviet Union, when you're a cast out, when your name is poison, and when you have no legal right to live outside of X, or inside of X, in other words, you may be banned from a city or banned from leaving a city.
No one will take you in because that would be criminal.
It's impossible. Yeah. People will shield their eyes, people will turn away, there is nowhere to go.
But Rostropovich, as a great musician, had the standing to take your dad in?
Correct. So not the legal standing, the moral standing, the status, the star status that he said he had not only did he have a dacha, which as everybody by now knows, I guess, even in English, is some kind of a country home, a second home. Not only he had a dacha, but a guest house near the dacha. So he had really two houses there. And he said, you come and live in my guest house. And that saved my father's life, very possibly at the time, for many reasons. And that was the first and very brave thing he did,
Now
the outrage of authorities.
You couldn't have known Shostakovich, who died in 1975, but you knew Rostropovich and well, and even performed with him, didn't you?
I did. I was fortunate to have known Rostropovich for my whole life, up until his death just 3 years ago. And
was he a kind of uncle?
He was
More a
maybe
dear family friend?
Maybe he was my great mentor. He was my great mentor and inspiration and great example to live up to in my field.
He became a conductor as well as a cellist. And did you perform as a concerto soloist with him?
I did. Shostakovich first piano concerto.
And what sort of experience was that?
Oh, it was fantastic.
Was Slava still in good shape at that point?
He was.
Musically and otherwise? Mm-hmm.
He certainly was. And he had fantastic ears. And he had an extraordinary ability to verbalize musical concepts.
It's a rare thing.
It's rare and
Very hard to talk about music. It's almost unconveyable in words.
Shostakovich says in Testimony.
Tell us what Testimony is. It's a book, right?
Testimony is
Your friend.
is a book by Solomon Volkov, which purports to be the really essentially verbatim memoirs of Shostakovich as dictated and as told to Solomon Volkov.
Sorry, tell me what you were saying about what Shostakovich said.
In this book, he says, with some bitterness, that, and I may misquote this exact words, but I think that I can vouch for the essence. He says, I used to think that music was enough. I used to think that music spoke for itself. But I do not think so anymore. Music needs help. Music needs words. And on in that vein.
Do you buy that?
If Shostakovich says it, I buy it.
Is he our last great composer? And by that I don't mean the last great composer we'll ever have in the history of the world. But is he our most recent great composer, in your opinion? If you regard him as a great composer.
Oh, yes. For me, he is at the very, very top. I would say that the death of Shostakovich in 1975 and Benjamin Britten in 1976, somehow great friends with each other, by the way, caps an era, for sure. Caps the 20th century, musically speaking. But it is difficult to evaluate music that is fresh, that is freshly written. There's no question. And there are tremendous composers working today and in this intervening period.
Who are a couple?
Gia Concelli.
A Georgian?
Yes, Georgian, Russian.
Whatever.
Yes.
Yeah, it gets murky.
Yeah, I think he probably would say both.
Yeah.
Sofia Gubaidulina. Rodion Shadrin. Thinking of Russian composers now, but Arvo Pärt.
Married to one of the greatest ballerinas in history.
That's right, Maya Plisetskaya.
I once said that they're possibly the most talented couple on earth. Shadrin and Plisetskaya.
That would be a good candidate for that.
Sorry, you said Arvo Pärt?
Arvo Pärt.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, for sure.
Many American composers, John Adams, John Corigliano, Elliott Carter, Milton Babbitt, who recently died. Many, Ned Rorem, and so on and so forth. Many interesting,
Michael Hirsch of Philadelphia.
outstanding young composer. Yeah. So there are strong names, important names that will be even more important as time goes by. Maybe names that will diminish, but it does seem that we require time to sort it out. And it's no better example than to think back of the controversy surrounding, it seems, every new piece Beethoven wrote. And how great contemporaries such as von Weber, Carl Maria von Weber, were dismissive, were aghast, were unable, self-professedly unable to comprehend what the heck this man was writing.
Do you feel an obligation to perform new music just because it's new, or does merit enter into it? In other words, do you exercise a kind of affirmative action for new music? I know there's always pressure on performers.
There is a great deal of pressure to perform new music. Probably not a healthy thing. Nothing in art should be done under pressure, unless it's self-pressure. But I do believe, I happen to agree, in other words, that it's important that new music be played. And I would say that it's important first and foremost for us performers, for us artists. We need that contact with active currents to keep what we do in perspective and to better relate, I think, to music of the past. Ultimately, it's music does not exist in the past or the future. It exists in time, but it exists always in the present time. And when we forget that, in the case of Beethoven and Brahms and indeed Shostakovich, that's not good.
You have a special relationship with Beethoven, I think. I heard you play the other night and play splendidly the piano sonata Opus 106, known to most of the world as the Hammerklavier or Hammerklavier sonata. Beethoven must be one of your top guys, someone to whom you feel especially close?
Yes, very much so.
Me too. I've always, a lot of people say that they wish that they had known certain composers, wish they could know personally in the flesh, composers and other artists. I've never really felt that way. I really haven't. Much as, for example, I appreciate and revere Bach, I don't really feel that I want to know him. I don't feel that way about Beethoven. I would have liked to know Beethoven. I wish I could know him now.
I completely agree. He is the one composer about whom everything is interesting.
Yeah, I'm interested in him personally,
That's right.
as a man,
That's right.
not just as a composer.
That's right. And well, it's interesting that we agree, and I'm sure not only you and I, on this. Why? Why is that? Beethoven is the ultimate champion of humanity.
He was great.
He's
He
the
was
ultimate
great.
friend. He's the ultimate mentor. He's the ultimate father. He's the ultimate brother.
He consoles you. He inspires you. He bucks you up. You are, in a sense, a grandson of Schnabel, Arthur Schnabel, the great pianist and great exponent of Beethoven, in that you studied with a prized student of Schnabel, did you not?
I did. I studied with Maria Curcio in London for several years, and Maria was indeed a prized, maybe the prized, but certainly a prized, a beloved pupil of Schnabel, and someone who really imbibed his outlook on music and on life in a way that few others have. And she revered his memory, and yet continued to, or perhaps she revered it by, not by freezing it in a kind of a museum of the mind or of the heart, but by continuously reinventing his way of teaching and his way of thinking about music and passing that torch on to her students. But I did feel his presence uncannily in her dark little garden flat in London with his portrait on the piano and the stories that she told and the manner in which she went about passing that torch along.
You must like the dual role of pianist and conductor. Many have. Will there come a time when the piano playing recedes and you'll spend more time, maybe even full time, on conducting? Or looking ahead, do you have a feeling you'd like to maintain this dual role? Is your career almost 50-50, piano and conducting? Or?
No, it is more conducting than piano.
Ah.
but I've maintained a healthy piano presence as well, although my main focus has been, for some time, has been conducting. Whether I would want to shift completely, we shall see.
I was talking to your friend Valery Gergiev once, the Russian conductor, and it was a public interview. And I said something like, an open-ended question, what does it take to be a conductor? I mean, why you instead of some other musician? And he said, and I thought he'd say certain musical things. He did in a way, but what he said was, above all, leadership. Do you feel that way?
Yes.
Some great musicians, great instrumentalists, are simply not cut out to be a conductor because of the absence of this quality of leadership?
Absolutely, and not only leadership. What is required beyond and above the primal and essential musical qualities that a conductor must possess in full bloom are these psychological qualities, an understanding of human nature, an understanding of how people function in groups, the group mentality, the way that people change, the same people, when they're in a group, and the best things that come out and frequently the worst things that come out. How to manage that. So it's management, you might say. How to manage people, how to bring out the best in them, how to lead them so that they feel not necessarily led, but so that they feel that they are willingly going somewhere. That's the best way. And so, yes, I think that Gergiev is absolutely right. These extra musical qualities that have actually nothing to do with music are certainly a prerequisite for a successful conductor, in addition to everything else.
I thought I'd ask you something about programming, which is always a hot topic in music.
Yes.
And the great buzz phrase is innovative programming. Everyone wants to program innovatively. And if it's an orchestra concert, for example, what is very much disdained by critics is overture, concerto, symphony. Traditional program opens with an overture, appropriately enough, concerto, after intermission, symphony. I love that formula or format. I think it can hardly be improved on. And one has many great nights in a concert hall hearing that. And in addition to the so-called innovative programming, how do you feel about this?
I don't disagree that the traditional format has served us very well. If you could only have one way of programming going forward, it should still be that. Overture, concerto, symphony. That's the best default format that anyone's come up with, in my view. But thankfully, we don't have to choose. And I for one don't really care what format it fits. If it fits best, if the repertoire I want to do or I'm doing that week fits into overture, concerto, symphony, so be it. I'm not going to change it or deform it in order to appease a critic. And conversely, I want to have the freedom and do have the freedom to program a program without a soloist, and to program two big symphonies, or indeed a series of shorter pieces. And
I like that.
I think freshness in programming, rather than necessarily innovation, is for me the way to go. Not to be restricted by really theoretical issues, but to find a program for any given evening. There's also, as you know, thematic programming for a whole season, or for a whole century, or I don't know for how long. People's lives aren't very long. We need to make sure that every concert that people attend is self-sufficient and self-sufficiently brilliant. And that, to me, is the first rule of programming, that every concert has its purpose.
Humor me in one of my pet peeves, and that is talking from the stage. There's an epidemic of it. When I was growing up, musicians seldom spoke from the stage because it wasn't a lecture. It was a musical program. It was a concert. And there was a kind of magic, something ceremonial about it. But very often now, people walk out onto the stage, it's a string quartet or a solo performer, and the people, they start to talk and kind of recite the program notes that we used to read when we wanted to. And I say now that everything's a concert lecture. But people defend us, they call it outreach. And they think maybe Shostakovich would agree that music needs this help from talking. My view, as long as I'm on a kind of harangue, is that the talking takes away from the music, renders the whole occasion less special because speech is so ordinary. And I often say that nothing can kill a musical evening quicker than talk. Am I a dinosaur?
I'm of two minds about this, truly of two minds. No question that this kind of informal bantering, into which it frequently devolves, takes away from just what you said, from the specialness, from the magic.
And the aura of the thing.
That's right. It used to be that any kind of performance, a magician's performance, perhaps a comedian's performance even, but any kind of performance on stage, certainly a musical performance, was an event, was a happening, was a way to touch something beyond the ordinary, beyond the routine. And in the big picture, that will always be, has to remain the same, otherwise there's no point. Mm-hmm. But the general tendency to demystify, to deformalize, for all the good reasons, has resulted often in just that, in a dressing down of the music and of the performers without any or very little upside. So I think you're right to bemoan the frequency and the other thing is that too often when we get up on stage we don't have anything of import to say. We speak too long, and we speak something that could easily have been put in the program notes, or indeed is already in the program notes.
Of course.
Again, as Shostakovich said, words can have an extraordinary impact in the way that we hear music.
Another pet peeve, well, not so much a pet peeve as an observation. I've written about this humorously, I hope, many times. What is it with that solid black Mao suit that musicians are wearing now? It used to be they had concert tails or a tuxedo or some kind of formal wear. Now everyone's in this sort of proletarian jumpsuit. I call it I don't know what they call it. I call it the Mao suit. It's the new cash, the new uniform. Do you do that?
I don't.
And I didn't think so. I didn't mean to insult you.
I don't. I don't understand this trend.
Have you noticed this Mao suit?
Well, it's everywhere.
It's like a pajama that
it's
people
everywhere.
come out in. And, yeah.
But again, I suppose what drives it is the notion that if we wear tails, our traditional white tie wear, or even a suit, that creates somehow a barrier with the public. Whereas if we wear just a shirt, that invites immediate union.
But it's nonsense. I mean, but the communication was always done musically, right?
That's right.
Do you have any time for? Do you like any popular music?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't mind it sometimes when it comes around, but
I believe I heard you put in a good word for heavy metal once.
Yes, I used to take quite some interest in heavy metal in high school. First of all, that's what in my high school people listened to in Vermont. But I was attracted, and still am attracted by its a certain rhythmic drive and even power that heavy metal can have, and just heavy rock. The minor harmonies, kind of noble, grand minor progressions that are very appealing. But ultimately, popular music's great weakness is in its technical primitiveness. What's the word? Everything's 4/4. The progressions are always the same, 1/4-5/1, or some variant of it. I mean, God forbid somebody should write a piece, a song in 3/4.
Mm-hmm. We used to have waltzes.
So it's a strange time for popular music.
Are you one of those who worry about the future of classical music? And
No.
where will the audience be? And
No.
I always, ad nauseam, I quote Charles Rosen, your fellow pianist, who says that the death of classical music is its oldest tradition. You don't sweat it?
I really don't. I really don't. I suppose I should, like everybody, in solidarity with most of my colleagues, and also for my own livelihood in the future, and so forth. But no, I don't.
Conservatories are packed with East Asian students,
Yeah.
right? Including your alma mater, the Curtis Institute in Philadelphia.
Yes. There are, look, of course arguments can be made in either direction. And there are always arguments in favor of panic. But I think that the majority of hard evidence, such as it is, points to, despite the difficulty of the last 2-3 years, in particular in the economy in general, world economy.
A little exceptional.
Certainly in the US and so forth. But these are ultimately blips. If they're not blips, we have bigger problems than filling concert halls.
A gun to your head, the 5 composers who mean the most to you. Give me some 5, gun to your head.
Beethoven, Schubert, Shostakovich, Brahms.
How many is that? Did you say Bach?
No.
Mozart? Mahler, Bruckner?
Maybe Bruckner.
Maybe Bruckner. Thought so. Symphonies. Give me some canon of symphonies.
You mean specific symphonies?
Yeah.
Well, Brahms 1, Brahms 3, Beethoven 9, Beethoven 7, Beethoven 3, Bruckner 7, Bruckner 8, Bruckner 9.
2 Shostakovich symphonies to which you feel close.
15, 10, 8.
Do you have a favorite composer? It's impossible, isn't it?
Well, I never
Depends
was.
on what you're playing.
It depends. I think for me, you strip it down, Beethoven and Brahms. There's that everlasting pair that sate every need that I have here and here. No other composer for me can address both in such a full, comprehensive way as Beethoven and Brahms.
Ignat, there's a consoling quality in Brahms. Once I was talking with Marilyn Horne, the great mezzo-soprano, and she said she was listening to Brahms more than ever. I said, why? She made a statement so simple and so profound. She said, he makes me feel good. I thought that was such a right insight, that there's a kindness about Brahms, a consolation, I find. I have a little coda about your father. I thought I would speak. It's something that occurred to me. I met a woman once who chronicles the Cultural Revolution in China. Years ago, I wrote about this lady. Her name is Yuquin Wang. That's just an approximation, an anglicization. She teaches at the University of Chicago, and she's devoted much of her life to chronicling this so-called Cultural Revolution, that burst of cruelty, depravity, and murder in the 1960s and 70s. I asked what motivated her to do this work, this chronicling. She said that she had encountered 2 writers early in her life. When she was a teenager, she read the Diary of Anne Frank, and like Anne, she began to keep a diary, even addressing it as Kitty. She felt the need to say something about the horrors that were occurring around her. You weren't allowed to talk about them. And as soon as she wrote an entry in her diary, she destroyed it, because you could be killed for what you'd confided to your diary. And when she got to Beijing University, she found a copy of Cancer Ward, your father's novel. And she said it seemed to be speaking directly to her and telling the story of her own country. Even the smallest details seemed right. So how did Solzhenitsyn know about her and her life? She said she couldn't sleep for the excitement of it. And then someone gave her a copy of the Gulag Archipelago, one of the few copies in all of China. It came from a contact in the English department of this university. And when she read it, she realized she had to do something truly useful in her life. She must not waste her time. She had to preserve the memory of innocent human beings destroyed by other human beings in the grip of a wicked and murderous ideology. Some people regard little Anne Frank and Alexander Solzhenitsyn as the two greatest witnesses of the 20th century, witnesses to the twin horrors of that century, close cousins, Nazism and communism. I like to think of that young Chinese woman with Anne Frank and Solzhenitsyn at her back. And I just thought I would say so. Thank you so much, Ignat. And thanks to all of you for being with us. Ignat Solzhenitsyn, I'm Jay Nordlinger on the Human Parade. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.